Hey, welcome to the Reefing Texan. This is episode 3. If you haven't seen the previous 2 episodes, I recommend you go back and watch those 2 episodes. That way you'll get a feel for what the channel's about and what I'm trying to do with the channel. This episode is going to be about quarantine tanks. Some reefers out there quarantine, some don't. It's always a big topic of discussion and debate, quarantine tanks. I'm just going to go over how I do quarantine tanks and some of the little tips that I've learned, and maybe that'll help you out with quarantine tanks. I strongly feel that you should quarantine. I'm going to tell you the same story that everybody else out there has told you. You know, you buy fish, you get impatient, you decide, oh, they look healthy at the store, oh, they're eating well. You know, I've spent all this money on these fish. I want to see them in my beautiful display tank. I don't want to see them in this ugly quarantine tank. So you acclimate them to your display tank and you throw them in there, and 5 days later you have an ick outbreak and you lose half the fish in your tank. Or you're taking every rock out of the tank to try to catch the fish to put them in the quarantine tank when you should have done that in the first place. Quarantine tanks can be done anyway. There's no right, there's no wrong. You can try to be as cheap as possible, or you can spend as much money as you have to spend on it. I'm sort of in the middle. I splurge on a few little things that aren't necessary for a quarantine tank that a lot of people probably don't, but I do. This tank that we're looking at here is a 40-gallon breeder. That's an example. I didn't have to buy that big a tank for a quarantine tank, but that's the direction I chose to go. You know, we all know the more water volume to have, the easier the quality of water is to keep stable. Less water, the littlest thing will set off your quality and it just crashes. So the more volume you can have, the easier it's going to be for you in the long run to keep higher water quality and keep your fish healthy. So that's why I went with a 40-gallon breeder. You can quarantine one fish in a 10-gallon tank. You can go 20, 25. There's no wrong, there's no right. I've seen guys, have a quarantine tank that's 150 gallons because that's what they had in the garage. So there's no right or wrong. This one again is the 40-gallon breeder. I sort of love the 40-gallon breeder tank. I love the dimensions of this tank. You can't see, but actually there's 2 of them. There's one I have up and running now, and there's another 40-gallon below. I just haven't set it up yet. This tank, 40 gallons, and it has 5 fish in it. It has 3 yellow tangs. I'm sorry, 6 fish. 3 yellow tangs, and there's 3 clownfish in here. So it gives me plenty of room, and I can quarantine 6 fish at the same time. So that's a benefit. Little trick or tip I'll give you as far as stands go. If you're running a 10-gallon or 20-gallon, you may be able to put it on a countertop in your home, or something like that. I found out that what works great is going to Lowe's and buying the storage shelf units that are made for garages. The metal ones with the MDF shelves. I think you can get a 4-shelf unit for $80, and each shelf is supposedly supposed to hold 1,000 pounds. I don't know if I'd push it to 1,000 pounds, but this tank's probably somewhere around 300-400 pounds, and I don't have a worry with the shelves handling that weight. Here's a little tip: if you do decide to go 40-gallon breeder, they fit perfectly on these shelves from Lowe's. The dimensions are exactly the dimensions of the shelves. So when you go and you set this thing down in there, it's just a perfect fit. So I saw that in another video, and so I went and measured the shelves, and sure enough they were right, so I bought the shelves. And the great thing is, for $80 you get 4 shelves. Well, you break the shelving unit in half, which I've done here, and I've got 2 shelves for 2 40-gallon breeders, and then I still got half a shelf in my garage. If I wanted to go another 2 40-gallon breeders and have a 4-tank quarantine system, you could do that all for the price of $80 at Lowe's for the shelving unit. So that's enough about that. But quarantining fish, everybody should do it. There's a proactive way or a reactive way to quarantine fish. You can be reactive, to where you just put the fish in a quarantine tank and you observe them and you wait for them to show signs of illness, which hopefully they don't. And if they do, then you treat them for that particular illness that they're showing, whether it be bacterial, fungal, or the worst case scenario, ick. I treat proactively. I'll buy the fish, I'll put the fish in the tank, I'll give them a day, 2, maybe 3 days to get used to the tank, get used to their tank mates, get used to the water, and make sure they're eating. And then once those things happen, I start hitting them with medication, whether they're sick or not. I'll usually start out with a bacterial medication, and then follow up with a fungal medication after that, and then after that I'll hit them with copper treatment for it, whether they show signs of it or not. And I just think that proactive is the best way to go. 4 to 6 weeks is typically quarantine time, and as long as you show patience, you'll be rewarded. There's nothing worse than buying fish and throwing them in your quarantine tank, and 2 days later they've got ick or Brooksonella, and fish are dying, and you're trying to catch these fish in your display tank and you can't do it, and you got to shut off all the pumps and remove all the rock just so you can catch these fish and put them in a quarantine tank, and then they may make it, they may not. So I know it's hard. I know that patience is not always our virtue in this hobby, but that's the key and the success to this hobby is patience. So even though you want to put these fish in your display tank, put them in the hospital first. How you set these things up is bare bones and simple. A lot of people just use the PVC pipe. That gives the fish a place to hide so that they feel more secure and don't have stress. And then sponge filters. The reason why sponge filters are great is they soak up and they act as great beneficial bacteria spots once the tank is cycled and you've grown that bacteria. They also serve dual purpose with as an air stone, and they aerate the water, break the surface of the water so that there's good oxygen in the water, which is important. Heater is the only other thing you really need in there. On my display tanks, I spend quite a bit of money on heaters. I believe they're important. You don't want one to fail. You want to be able to control them, precisely. For a quarantine tank, I usually just buy the ones that are preset at a temperature. You can buy them and they're preset at 78 degrees. There's no adjustment knob. There's no messing around with it. They're just set at 78 degrees. And I throw those in there and a thermometer, and that's it. As far as lights go, this is way too much overkill. This is an AI Prime light. I just happen to have one laying around, so instead of going out and buying one, this is what I use. You don't even have to have a light on a quarantine tank. You can just use ambient room light from the sun shining through your windows, and that would be fine for a quarantine tank. On this tank, I've tried to do something different for the first time. I've actually got hang-on filters on the back of my quarantine tank. I bought I see everybody, the hot thing right now is those Pro Clears that are hang-on filters, and they have the little media baskets in them that holds a sponge and ammonia or carbon or whatever you want to put in there. So I bought 2 of those since I had 2 40 gallons, but right now I just have this tank running, so I have both hang-on filters on the back of this tank. There's also another thing I'd like to hit is starting these tanks up. A lot of us won't have one running, and when we need one, we're in a mad rush to get one up and running. We're putting brand new water in there. There's no beneficial bacteria, and we're throwing the fish in there because it's an emergency. That stresses the fish out, and that gives the fish even a less chance of survival if they're sick. So with my quarantine tanks, I cycle my quarantine tanks just like I would a display tank. There's many ways to do that. You can take these sponge filters and you can put them in the sump of your already up and running and cycled display tank, and the beneficial bacteria will grow on those sponges, and then you transfer those sponges right into here, and now you have beneficial bacteria that'll help cycle the tank quickly. You can use display water from your display tank to fill this. That's another way to get some of that beneficial bacteria in there. So I guess the point of that conversation is, once you get one of these running and you've had fish through it and you know the tank is cycled and it has that beneficial bacteria in it, always leave it up and running. If you just have to spend $4 on a damsel or 2 and throw them in there just to always have fish in there, leave them up and running until you know that you're done buying fish. You know, I think we all have a wish list of fish that we want in our display tank, and you know, at the beginning of that tank, you know, we get online and search pictures of fish, and ooh, I want that one, and I want that one, and we make that list. And once you've completed that list and you've knocked out all those fish and you're done buying fish, then, well, of course, you don't need the quarantine tank running anymore, and you can shut it down and clean it up and put it in the garage for an emergency. But this is my quarantine tank. I can't preach how important they are. Everyone should use them. Every fish, every piece of coral, everything that goes in your display tank should be first quarantined. You don't want to quarantine your fish and your coral in the same tank. You should have a frag tank that you can quarantine coral in, and then a quarantine or hospital tank for your dedicated fish. But any questions or any concerns you have, please comment or ask those questions. I'll gladly answer them for you. But again, I think the most important thing is try and get as big as you can. That way it helps stabilize the water quality. Also, I think it's important that you cycle the quarantine tank just like you would any display tank. And then the third thing is, once you've got it up and you've got it running and you've got it cycled and you're pushing fish through it, leave it up and running until you're done with that punch list of fish you want and there's no more fish going to be purchased. Then you can take it down. So I appreciate your time and watching this video. Again, subscribe to the channel. We're going to have a lot of videos coming out over the next weekend or so. And then a lot of videos planned on the 375 shallow reef tank that I have being set up now. Actually, I'm setting it up, but I'll be making videos of that every step of the way. The very first video we put on the channel last night shows where that tank's going and talks about that tank. So if you're interested in following the build of a 375 gallon all acrylic shallow reef tank, then subscribe to the channel and watch that first video and stay with us moving forward. I appreciate it. Thank you.